Hello, NFT land. I'm Creatorius Rex. You might also know me as Brett Kinsella, and we are here once again with the Notorious Show. In this time, we have one of our special editions, Artist Spotlights. And when I'm doing an Artist Spotlight, I always have my good friend with me, Skojo.
Hello. Like a dramatic entrance.
Yes, Skojo, just back from, I don't know, what was it, a month of vacation? Is that how long you were gone? It was a long time.
About 8-9 days, but it felt like a month.
Absolutely. Well, we missed you. I'm glad you're back just in time because you've got to head off to New York in a couple days. There's a new show going on.
That's right.
That's probably a good time to bring up our featured guest, Colin Goldberg.
Colin Goldberg.
What's up, guys?
Hello, Colin. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you guys doing?
Very, very good. Colin Goldberg is a Bronx-born American artist who coined the term Techspressionism as a title for a solo show in 2011. Now, Techspressionism is defined as an artistic approach in which technology is used as a way to express emotional or subjective experience. Now, even though Colin does not want to be called the founder, which I won't call you that, Colin, but you kicked off a movement which is picking up steam as a global phenomenon with hundreds of artists across 41 countries. That's amazing. His own work marries many disciplines, including painting, drawing, photography, printmaking, and all kinds of digital media, including some very cool new AR work that we're going to discuss today. Please welcome Colin Goldberg.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Colin, another word for kicking off is founding. I just like, I deal in words. You guys deal in images. Yes. Okay. So I'm interested. How did you guys meet? Because I met you, Colin, through Skojo. So how did you guys get together?
Well, when I first started growing Techspressionism into a group, which was kind of around the start of the pandemic, I had initially sort of come up with the term as the title for this solo show maybe 10 years prior, but it wasn't until the pandemic that I started really percolating this idea of growing it into a group. And it started when I saw in a Google News search there was another artist calling herself a Techspressionist. And I thought, maybe there's some legs to this. So my wife was like, she stole your idea, and I was like, well, maybe there's, another way to look at this. So I contacted her. Her name's Ozvan Rosen. And I said, hey, what do you think about the idea of trying to develop this into an artist group? And she was open to it. I invited two other artists, Steve Miller and Patrick Lichty. Steve was someone that I worked for as a studio assistant about 30 years ago in the Hamptons. And Patrick and I did our MFAs together in computer art at Bowling Green State University. So we knew each other that way. And I ran it by a critic and a curator named Helen Harrison, who actually wrote the catalog text for my solo show 10 years prior. And she is the director of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center in East Hampton, which is the former home and studio of Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, who are, notable abstract expressionist painters. So Techspressionism, from the get-go was like I saw it as part of a continuum that started really with the figurative expressionists in Germany that were like working maybe in the 1930s. Kandinsky, there were two groups, Der Blau Reiter and De Brücke out of Germany. There were figurative expressionists, and then in the 50s, people like Pollock, Franz Klein, de Kooning were the abstract expressionists. But it was really critics. Notably Clement Greenberg and Harold Rosenberg that wrote about abstract expressionism and capitulated the ideas behind it that made it into a movement. The painters really were just making their work, but it was the writers. So having Helen involved has been extremely important, and she's the advisor for the group. And so the five of us met at our first salon, which are these biweekly Zoom meetups, and kind of came up with this definition. And one really important thing that came out of that was that Helen stressed that we should change the word from an artistic style in which technology is used to an artistic approach. And I didn't really appreciate the importance of that until later. But then I think about things like glitch art or vaporwave, where you look at them and you're like, oh, that's a glitch piece, that's a vaporwave piece. And I really didn't want Techspressionism to be something where all the work is unified under a single aesthetic. And that, I think, is what makes the exhibition that's coming up really interesting, because it's extremely diverse, both in terms of media, but also in terms of style. So yeah, so getting back to how Skojo and I met, we decided that the hashtag Techspressionism was going to be a really good way of basically finding other artists who are interested in this idea, and who identified with this idea. And I really feel that Techspressionism is based around the idea of self-identification. That is, if artists identify with Techspressionism and say, hey, I think my work is Techspressionist, those are the people that I want to be involved, not a bunch of other artists saying, that guy's Techspressionist, this one isn't. That's really not what it's all about. So I started, searching for other related hashtags. I think it might have been like digital art was one of them, a couple other things. And I saw this work that was like sort of, abstract. It looked like almost like folded fabric, but definitely digital in some way, and really cool. And I was like, who is this guy? So I put, I commented hashtag Techspressionism at Techspressionism, fire emoji, fire emoji, fire emoji. And then, that the rest is history. We got in contact with each other. Skojo got involved early on as the Pinterest lead for Techspressionism, and we have different artists running each different social channel, and it's kind of gone from there. So
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think about like a few of the things you said in terms of Techspressionism, and it's probably notable. Like, so you had the show. When was it? 2012,
2011.
2011, and then you became world famous in Wired magazine, didn't you? Shortly after that.
Well, I don't know if it's world famous, but there was an article in Wired that came about after a show that I did in 2014, also called Techspressionism, that another artist curated, and it was held at a commercial gallery, and the gallery owner was able to hook that up in terms of press contacts, and in the article, they referred to it as a movement, which is something that I've been very reticent to do, even though other people are now saying it's a movement. It just feels weird coming out of my mouth. But I'll cite that article as it was first referred to
That's right.
as a movement in Wired in 2014. But yeah, I mean, I think that uh, that was definitely one of those moments where I thought, this thing probably is something I should continue with. First Helen's involvement giving me some confidence that maybe there is some reason to continue this beyond just the title of a show. And I think a lot of it was driven by rejection from traditional art world outlets like galleries that I'd come in and show them the work, and they'd be like, is this digital? And I'd be like, yeah, it is actually. And they'd be like, well, we're really not interested, and I got a lot of that, and
Really?
it was,
Yeah.
very disheartening, through the years. I mean, I finished my undergrad degree in painting in like 94, and but I also, was involved with digital work throughout that whole time period, and the traditional art world does not get this yet. And maybe that's why the NFT phenomenon came about, is things had to fork at some point, right? So now it's like this other art world that's a completely different set of inhabitants.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Now, I will say that you mentioned this idea about a movement. So maybe it couldn't have been a movement until it has a name. And then it got a name, it got named in movement, but it wasn't cohesive probably until you formed the group and gave people this chance of self-expression. And I really like this idea because I didn't know this, and you and I've talked about this a lot. I didn't know that like your whole goal was to get people to self-identify as opposed to like identify people, but it rings true to me. I've had an opportunity to spend some time in the Techspressionism community, and I can't tell you how many times I hear somebody mention, "Oh yeah, I'm in Techspressionism." And it was the time when I found Techspressionism, I finally found my people.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's something that I like our moderator Davo, um, Devonte Bradley is his full name, but he kind of uses the artist name Davo, and he was one of these people where I tagged his work, I saw his work, I was like, yeah, this work is dope. This is someone that I would want to be involved in this, and he wrote me this DM back over Instagram like, I didn't know that other people were doing like abstract work on the computer. Like, I think I might have found like my people or something to that effect. And I was like, I got to call this guy up, So we scheduled the time to talk, and then he ended up kind of taking on the role of the moderator of these salons. And it was actually Davo's idea to record them and publish them to YouTube, which was a real pivotal moment, I think, in terms of how this project has developed, because all of a sudden people were like, wait, I don't just get to go to these salons, I get to be recorded for posterity and then published on the Techspressionism YouTube channel. So then all of a sudden people were like, I want to present my work on there,
Oh,
and
right.
it
Yes.
changed the dynamic a little bit, in a good way, and I think that uh, these kind of contributions from other artists are really what make this interesting. And verse like in lieu of the word movement, or I really prefer to look at it, and again, like I think Techspressionism is a convenient and good name, like a portmanteau that is kind of clever, but also descriptive, but it names something that's been in existence prior to the name
Yes.
existing, if that makes sense.
Isn't that always the case?
I think so. Like it's something that should have been like, most of the people, myself included, like a lot of my work, I paint and then I run it through this big printer behind me and I paint on it again. So it's not really accurate to call it digital art, because it's not. A lot of it is actually oil or acrylic on linen with inkjet. It's, physical work that incorporates, and that's nothing new. I mean, a lot of the pop artists, Rauschenberg, Warhol, they did screen printing on top of painted surfaces. This is just inkjet printing on top of painted surfaces. It's the next generation of that same combo, right? And I think that, to me, like digital art, new media art, um, neither one of those really was an accurate description of my own work and plenty of other people's work whose work involves technology, but it isn't something that can be saved as a file. It's a physical object, like Skojo's work, where he might create an image digitally, like your work in the Techspressionism Digital and Beyond show, where it's a digitally composed image that then is hand painted on top of and turned into a unique art object. That's no longer digital art. It's a unique physical art piece. So
It could be all digital, though, correct?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, many of the works in that show are NFTs, and time-based pieces where there's a reel that contains work of a lot of the international artists that is fully digital.
Right.
That there's no other way to view it other than on a screen. Definitely with the NFTs, it's inherently digital art. So to me, not all Techspressionist work is digital or physical,
Right.
and there was a guy, one of the artists in the show is an artist named Joseph Nekvatal, who did a lot of the really early sort of generative work. He worked with coders and used computer viruses to generate his paintings. And back in the day when I was living in the city, I was doing a project kind of along the lines of Techspressionism, but it was all types of artists, like poets, writers, musicians, interviewing each other and stuff. And everyone was on dial-up, and people were using real video. So there
Mhm.
was a much more limited audience. There was no broadband, and
Right.
so the project kind of dried up. But he did convey to me this idea of social sculpture, which is a term invented by this artist Joseph Beuys in the 70s. And um, within the time of this Techspressionism thing being developed, that came back to me, and it really resonated with me in the idea that Techspressionism, um, like I like to like think of it as a piece of social sculpture that's sort of collaborative and participatory, in that, like, it doesn't have to follow the model of an organization or a collective or even a movement.
Oh, right.
The idea of it being art, it's very sort of liberating to think of it in that way. So
Yeah, you mentioned a couple minutes ago about being rejected by the traditional art world. They didn't get it, they didn't care about it, they just didn't like it. Whatever it wasn't what they had deigned to say is art, or at least high art that they're going to put their reputations behind.
mhm.
And it strikes me you started working in the web in the 90s. So did Skojo and I. So we saw the world that was analog, and then digital, and like all the digital came up, and like it's been this explosion of discovery, right? Creating this new digital world. And it was really interesting to me that end of last year, Skojo and I were having all these conversations about what was going on in art, what was going on in NFTs, what was going on in tech. And we're like, oh, I've been part of this transformation, digital transformation of dozens of industries over the last 25, almost 30 years now. And I started thinking about it. It's like, oh, geez, the art world hasn't really changed. It's still mostly physical pieces. It's still mostly controlled by the galleries and a few critics, a few reps. I was like, oh, I know what's going to happen, because now we've got some of this new technology that we've already introduced to other places like retail and media and all these other things. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, okay. So now we have this really interesting technology like NFTs. It's going to blow up the old model. And it's really interesting because it is sort of blowing up the old model. It's certainly kind of like Spotify did. It created a way for a lot of people to get to market who hadn't previously had a way to, like CD Baby, and then Spotify sort of broke down the stranglehold that the record labels had on that. And so streaming music is a very different business than it was 15 years ago. And the art world has not been, until I think the last year.
Mhm.
Now anybody can get to market. Anyone can bring their ideas there. There is no more gatekeeper. And then I see some of the institutions of the art world, Sotheby's, Christie's, getting into this. And I see all these other new companies, whether it be a Super Rare or Nifty Gateway or OpenSea, filling a role that you might expect a gallery to play in the past. So you and I talked about NFTs, I don't know, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, the first time we met. I mean, when you thought about that, like, were you initially resistant to this? Because, I mean, let's face it. I mean, most people are. They're like, this is weird.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you the exact moment really that this gelled for me was early on, and this is probably, I'm not sure at what point within Techspressionism, this is early on, like when there really weren't many people showing up at the salons and stuff, and this guy came in, I think I tagged his work on Instagram, and he was starting to do some NFTs, these portraits, these sort of vector portraits, and he was on Rarible. I was like, hey, I signed up for Rarible, like, and he gave me a little bit of a tutorial, and I started messing around, and I minted a couple things that I burned because I hated them. And then he he was like telling me about this project that he had brewing. I really wasn't really paying too much attention to it. He's an Italian artist. He was in the UK at the time, named Andrea Bonaceto. And we did like a Telegram call where he kind of like, just kind of like explained NFT stuff to me a little bit. He was ahead of me in terms of like the process. And he was kind of like a finance guy. I think he was involved in crypto based, sort of investing. Right. So maybe, a month later, my wife and I are sitting on the couch watching local Long Island news. And there's a story that comes on that's one of those stories that's not a local story. It's, how local stations get these cherry pick these stories. It's like, artist creates the first NFT in collaboration with a humanoid robot.
Oh, right.
And
Yes.
I'm watching this and I'm like, I know that guy. So the story goes on to say that his drop was Um, one piece sold for 700,000. His one of one that was done in collaboration with Sophia, which was a robot created by this lab in Hong Kong, Hanson Robotics. And I was just like, huh. I just talked to that guy like a couple weeks ago, and like we were minting stuff on Rarible for like a tenth of an ETH. Like, what is going on here? You know what I mean? And I reached out to him, and he's like, yeah, I mean, and that's when I was like, this is it. Like, I'm getting involved in this. You know what I mean? And it was shocking, really. Um, you know, so yeah, and since then, and that around that time was when I started really seriously looking at what I was going to do and started developing this Metagraph collection. This idea of taking these drawings that I did back in the 90s and sort of turning them into animations and minting them out. Like, I started to percolate this idea in my head, and I was like, this would be perfect for an NFT because it's taking some of my existing material and turning it into something new, and I really like the idea of creating time-based work, like animations or audiovisual pieces specifically as NFTs, because I feel like that's something that's very difficult to appreciate on anything other than a screen. You can't really and I've minted some of my physical pieces as well, and the whole physical digital thing is still something I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around and figure out, playing with different combos of that. But like an animation is basically something, viewed on a screen. And I feel like for people who have been, made video art and time-based work, I mean, NFTs are like, a technology made for these people, right? That's something specifically that's historically been very difficult to monetize within the art world, or even to exhibit or to get any traction within the art world. The alternative was selling, a signed and numbered DVD, which isn't very appealing to collectors, So I think that, yeah, I mean, NFTs are, they're definitely something that people are pushing back against a lot now. But I think that, like you were saying about how this is something new that is a threat. I mean, I don't know exactly the numbers, but from what I heard last year, the market cap on fine art NFTs exceeded all other contemporary art combined. That is, the amount of money exchanged for fine art NFTs was more than all the physical work sold at Sotheby's, Christie's, Phillips, all of the auction houses combined. And that's a big deal. I just found out that we had our very first online show was called NFT Now, and we have an artist in the group, Ann Spalter, who curated that show, and she was just in the New York Times like less than a week ago. She curated Sotheby's first generative art NFT show that had Genesis NFTs from people like Roman Farasco, all these different pretty notable, digital artists. And, I mean, Sotheby's, you know what I mean? It's no joke. So pretty interesting. She had a serious background and resume prior to getting involved with Techspressionism. So I was pretty stoked when she got involved to begin with. But that was pretty cool. She's gonna have a bunch of work in the exhibition in Southampton that are actually pastel drawings, but they're based on AI generated compositions that she then executed by hand as pastel drawings. And I saw those and I was like, those are cool. Like I want to show the pastels. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the reaction is off of those.
Cool. Colin, you mentioned animations and time-based stuff. I know you do a lot of things that are based on like the number 23.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that number, why it's significant to you?
Yeah, so the number 23 basically is something that is important to me because it's the day of the month I was born. It's also the day of the month that my daughter was born. And she was actually born at 6:23 p.m. on 6/23 on June 23rd, which is very strange. But I've been, and I was actually born on December 23rd, so we're sort of 6 months apart as far as birthdays go. And though that like you know, I had already been using 23 as a number, and you know, I use it in a variety of ways. Like I do the majority of my composition in Illustrator, so there's a lot of opportunities to enter in a number, like to do transformations and other things. So I'll use, you know, a lot of times 23 or 71, which is the year I was born in. Um, and so yeah, that's kind of the origin of why I use that. And all of my NFTs in this Metagraph NFT collection are 23 seconds long. I drop them on the 23rd of the month, and there will be 23 of them, 8 of which have been minted so far. So
Very cool.
Okay. All right, so let's get into some of your art.
Yeah, let's see it.
awesome.
So tell me about this first piece.
Okay, so this piece is called Paradox. It's an abstract digital piece from 2003. And this one is one of the anomalies, actually. It's not vector-based. It was done in Photoshop at fairly high resolution. I have it as a digital monoprint upstairs. It's hanging up in our living room, actually. It's about 3 by 3 feet. And it was created in Photoshop, actually. And the original image that it was derived from were analog photos that were long exposure. So I used to take a film camera when I was living downtown in the East Village and take pictures of the streetlights and move the camera around and get these light trails. And then I drop those. You could sort of see the light trails in like it almost looks like if there's a figure, it would be on the top of his head. And then, you know, kind of like, I mean, what I find interesting with this piece and a lot of the abstract work is hearing what people see in it. And a lot of people tell me they see different sort of animals. I see a Buddha sort of like standing, like sitting, like with his palms raised up. I didn't create it for it to be like that. You know, other people see like a skull head or a skeleton.
I see a frog hallucinating.
Nice.
Octopus.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah,
Very
this
cool.
is a great piece. So you mentioned you did this in Photoshop, which is unusual for your work. Were you doing at that time? Were you doing a lot of Photoshop work?
Actually, you know what? I started out with digital stuff in Photoshop, actually. You know, back in probably my first experience with Photoshop was like 1992 or 3, maybe. I did an internship as an undergrad for a graphic designer. And I did an internship prior to that where we were actually using a Mac connected to something that would print out little strips of type, and we would use a waxing machine and shoot stats in a dark room to create photographic plates. Old school design. And then, you know, I kind of got my first taste of Photoshop shortly after that. And then around 99, I shifted almost completely to working with Illustrator and vector-based work when I found out you could scale it up to basically any size without any loss of resolution.
Scoj, were you doing that as well? Were you doing Photoshop as well before Vector?
Oh yeah, trying to figure it out. I mean, I remember playing around with Adobe Illustrator and using Streamline. Do you remember that tool?
Yeah.
Colin? Streamline.
Yeah, actually, Streamline
stuff.
I started using again to create these robot drawings. Like some of the robot drawings that I've been doing, I've been using Streamline. And what I did was, since you can't run it on a Mac anymore, unless you still have like a really old Mac,
I was going to say,
I
how'd
installed
you
an
get that?
emulator. Yeah, there's an emulator called Sheepshaver for Mac that lets you run old versions of Mac OS. And there's actually a site called the Old Mac Software Repository or something, where you can get all the old Adobe apps and video games with serials. Like no one cares anymore about them because they're so old. But
Wow. Cool.
yes. And that previous piece, Paradox, I actually minted out as an NFT on Foundation. So that was sort of an experiment.
Cool.
So that's this one, Paradox.
Yeah, I started a collection called Early Digital. That's the only one in it so far, but I actually was looking through a bunch of old video art stuff that I did when I was a grad student. And I thought, you know, like I never did anything with this stuff because I couldn't figure out what to do with it. So now I know what to do with it. You know, I'm going to mint it at some point.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, so let's see. We have another piece here. This is one that I picked out. I've seen a lot of your work, but I hadn't seen this one before. I saw it. I found it just looking through some different things. Tell me what's going on here.
So this piece is from a series that I call Photoconstructs. And they're basically works that incorporate original photography in some way. And I like the idea of using photography in the work. Rauschenberg is an artist I really admire, in that he combined photography a lot, usually with photo silk screen and painting together. He was one of the first artists to really do that. Like, him and Warhol, I would say, were the two that come to mind. But most of their imagery was appropriated, either sort of from pop culture, Campbell soup cans.
Right.
Rauschenberg took a lot of political images. So with me, like this series is a lot more about a documentary of my own life, pictures that I took personally, and they remind me of a certain time of my life. This is a beach near where I grew up, out on Long Island. And the original painting was about 3 by 4 feet. It's sold actually, but it has these sort of wireframe forms in the background and stuff like that. I think this was called Peconic Bay with Wireframe, and it's probably from around, I would say 2014 or something like that.
So what's going on with the stripes in this?
Is that the vector-based stuff?
Oh, you mean like the down the center?
Yeah.
I don't really know. Like, I think I use this negative space in a lot of my work, and sort of like knocking out a part of the image.
Mhm.
And I spend a lot of time, and I still do, doing design work. And I think that there's a part of my head that is a designer and a part of my head that's like a painter. And sometimes like they interact, and usually like the designer self like jumps in and puts in these sort of hard edge forms or geometric forms. A lot of my paintings have like these white squares in them, which people are like, yeah, could I see that? Could you make one of those like, but without the white squares? And I'm like, no, that's part of the work. You know what I mean? And there's one show actually that I saw at the Guggenheim years ago by this artist Zaha Hadid, who is recently passed away. I think she was an Iranian artist, and more notable as an architect though. And I saw in the show like she had these wall art pieces, crazy sculptures, and then buildings that she designed, and automotive designs that were super futuristic. And what amazed me was like she crossed all of these boundaries of like fine art, applied art, didn't try to like pigeonhole herself as one thing, and just made whatever she wanted. And I thought that was so interesting to see that, like, people usually say, well, to make it as an artist, you have to have a style that's recognizable, and just make sure you keep doing that, and she did the opposite of that. Gerhard Richter is another person that comes to mind, that amazing abstract art painter, amazing abstract paintings, amazing photorealistic paintings. He did a whole series where he painted on photographs, which are really just ridiculously cool. And he's probably one of the top selling living artists that is alive today. I mean, he's fairly old at this point, but he's another one that never, found the need to define himself as one thing, and yet in the face of that was still successful, and that's very inspiring.
Another advantage of having the broad definition of Techspressionism.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think, and I mean, a lot of my work, it looks like it's a work of 5 different artists. You know what I mean? And I was talking to someone today, and they're like, "Well, I forget. Like, oh, it was one of the artists, Roz, and she's like, she was like, well, I wouldn't only describe myself as a Techspressionist. And I was like, I wouldn't either. I mean, I have a whole series of work that are ballpoint pen drawings. They're definitely not Techspressionist. They're ballpoint pen drawings. I mean, unless you look at a ballpoint pen as technology, which it is to some degree. But I mean, that's a stretch. So yeah.
Well, I'd say you're in good company. Picasso did a lot of different things. All right. So you just mentioned this. This is one of the robot drawings, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so just tell people what you were doing here with the mixed media that you have going on.
So it was actually through Techspressionism. I met a guy who came into one of the salons, an artist named Peter Bourget. He has a work in the show. It's actually an artist that's on the same wall as you, Skojo.
Oh, cool.
You, Michael Price, who is a Niftorian mint pass artist, and then to the right of his work is this guy Peter Bourget, and he actually hacked a vinyl cutter and turned it into a robotic print, drawing device. It's sort of a large format version of what I have, which is something that I bought that was already made to be what it is, called an AxiDraw, and that basically is a pen plotter, so it'll hold like a pen or a pencil. And this one is I started with India ink on black paper, white India ink, and sort of like turquoise India ink. And then on top of that, I used the pen plotter to draw with a gold pen and then white ink pen on top of it. And then the forms were composed in Illustrator. So I really like being able to use metallics and white ink, which is something I can't do with my inkjet. And I've also been doing a lot of robot drawings with graphite, with a pencil, actually.
Hmm.
What kind of washers are those? Is that India ink, watercolor, acrylic? What do you use?
It's India ink, actually. Yeah. So, and I really like using white India ink, which is something that I've been using a lot, like in the last couple of years in my paintings and works on paper. And a lot of my work on paper incorporates this sort of very loose like ink wash stuff, and I always that embraces sort of like the accident, right? It's like you can't really control like where it's going to go. Usually I put water down on the surface first and then just drip the ink in and see what happens. And I kind of I work in a very production line kind of way. That is, I'll lay out like a dozen pieces of paper, create these grounds with the ink, and then create different compositions. What I'll do is I'll photograph the ground, bring it into the computer, and then compose images in another layer on top of it as a mock-up. And then I actually run the painted surface through a printer, or in this case, I lay it down on under the pen plotter and have it draw on top of it.
That was going to be my next question in terms of your process. Do you ever mix it up? Do you ever like try to go with the vector stuff first, or do you ever have any compositional ideas before you go into your wash? So you have certain colors or certain ways you want it to flow? Or do you mix it up?
Usually I start with the painting first, but not always. Like usually, actually, I'm more so in the paintings. Like sometimes I'll do like a very sort of like almost a mesh or a grid or something first with the inkjet, and then paint on top of it. Like I have three pieces in the Southampton show. One of them is a digital drawing, straight digital drawing that's printed large as digital monoprint on vinyl. That's about like 6 by 8 feet. That's the one that has sort of an AR component. And then there's two smaller works that are about 3 by 4 feet that are paintings, and those are acrylic and inkjet on linen, and they have probably 5 or 6 layers each. So I do paint and then print, and then I paint on top of it and print on top of it. So I really have no idea like what it's going to be until it's done. They're just sort of like they evolve with each new layer. And there's definitely many of them that end up in the trash bin. And you know, uh, One sort of quick story about that process is, so my mom is of Japanese ancestry on both sides of her family. Her mother and father both, their families originated from Japan. So my grandmother Kamie was sort of she was a calligrapher, and she taught and studied calligraphy both in Japan and Honolulu, and which is where my mother was born. And my mom said when she was a little girl, her mother, my grandmother Kamie, used to sit at the kitchen table writing kanji, which are Japanese characters, doing this calligraphy, and she'd do the same character over and over again for hours. Make the character, crumple it up. Make the character, crumple it up. And like anytime she did one that she thought was good, she would set it aside until she like had it exactly the way that it was supposed to be, like in her eyes. And so there'd be this bin of like thrown away ones, and I sort of like adopted that, and at some point like I bought a calligraphy set when I was visiting her. I thought she'd be so proud of me, you know. I was like, Grandma, like I'm gonna learn calligraphy. And she was like, who do you think you are? Like, you can't learn without a sensei. You know what I mean? I was just like, oh, you know, and and I realized, you know, like there was really no way that I was gonna learn um, kanji. Like, you know, every word is a character, and there's thousands of characters. But I did sort of incorporate stylistic elements of Japanese calligraphy into my Shoto series, which are based on that idea, but they're not characters that really mean anything.
Okay, so let's talk about the show that's coming
Okay.
up.
Yeah, so this show is opening up on the 21st in 2 days, actually. Wow. I just came back up to Vermont from Southampton, and I grew up out there. You know, I went to Southampton High School and was like sort of a local kid. It was a very strange place to grow up in retrospect. It was just where I grew up when I was growing up, but I would see these people who were like very wealthy. My dad was a college professor, so we were like sort of a middle class family, but it was a strange environment to grow up in, looking back on it. And now I look at it and it's not the norm, I would say. There's a lot of oddities there, but you know, a very beautiful place. And the show, you know, it's in a building that used to house a museum called the Parish Art Museum, which has since moved to Watermill a little bit further away. But that building actually was where I first publicly exhibited my work when I was a high school student at the East End Student Show in 1989. So I actually hung my painting as a high school student in that same building,
Wow.
and it's just very, very, you know, it's interesting how that all worked out. But yeah, the show opens up on Thursday. The reception is going to be on Saturday, and it runs through June 4th.
Okay, that's good. So people have a chance to come see this if they're out there.
Hmm.
So what do we have here?
So that's sort of like walking into the space. You can see the quote on the top, which is each age finds its own technique, which is something that Pollock said years ago in the 1950s. And actually, Helen Harrison selected that quote, you know, in her first essay like 10 years ago as sort of an opener to it. And I thought it was really apropos to put that in that sort of entranceway. And then looking down through into that main space, there's a large inflatable sculpture by an artist named Michael Rees, Rees, who's really interesting. He's done work with technology for many, many years, shown at the Whitney, all over the place. And that sculpture actually has an AR component. So there's a drawing on it, and there's actually a tablet that's set up on like a little pedestal on wheels where you move it over, and when it locks onto that visual element, you see an unexpected animation happen, kind of walking over the surface of the sculpture. I'm not going to give away the punchline to that, but it's pretty neat.
All right, I hope to see a video of it because I'm not going to make it up.
I'll take plenty of videos for you.
I'm sure you will.
Mhm.
Okay, so here's the other
And that's
side of that.
yeah, that's a close up, and then sort of behind that is this grid of work that are printed on aluminum, and those are from artists from 14 different countries. So there's artists from Afghanistan, Ukraine, Russia, a whole bunch of different places that submitted high-res images, and you know, there's a small budget to work with through the Art Center, so we sourced them out to a fabricator and had them produce as digital monoprints on aluminum. And I actually created a web form for the artists to submit their work where they digitally signed the form like DocuSign, and I
Mhm.
made labels. So on the back of each piece, it's digitally signed by the artist as a one of one.
Very
Oh,
cool.
cool. So is it like etched?
Well, they're printed on white aluminum, and then the back is just an adhesive label,
I
basically,
got it.
that's, you know, printed and signed, you know, digitally.
I love the look of aluminum. The pieces printed on aluminum. Um, okay,
Yeah,
so
they're actually printed on white aluminum, which is very interesting. I'd never done that before, but it really allows for a true photographic image. That is, the whites really pop. You know, and I've only seen images prior to this printed on straight aluminum where it's the
okay.
metallic surface, but you could see like those two in the middle row on the right, how like the white really, you know, comes through, and they're very luminous. And the one with the eyeballs is the artist from Ukraine. who is an artist named Meltdown Love. He's based in Kyiv right now. He's safe. I've been keeping in contact with him. And actually, the one on the top row in the middle is an artist from Russia. So it's really interesting, to see what's going on right now with the current situation over there. These artists, and they're artists
Yes.
and comrades with each other, in the sense that the Russian artist was even like, you know what, like, I'm interested in donating my proceeds to those who need it more than me, which I thought was really telling.
Cool.
So this is a series of 3D printed sculptures by an artist named Suzanne Anker. She's actually, I think, she's the dean or undergraduate chair. She basically runs the undergraduate program at School of Visual Arts in New York City. And these are the original Rorschach blots that she extruded in a 3D program, and then had them 3D printed in plaster. And then the smaller ones in the center row are cast in bronze.
Oh, wow. Yeah, those are really cool. So she basically took the Rorschach and, created this idea of what it would look like in 3 dimensions.
She kind of, took the original blots and sort of, did a manipulation with them, I think in Maya, and then had them 3D printed, in plaster with rapid prototyping. Really, really pretty remarkable. And this is the first time this body of work has been exhibited anywhere, I believe.
Yeah, good stuff.
And here we have on the left my main man Skojo. Those two smaller pieces are digitally composed images that Skoj then painted into, and then topped with a resin top coat. They are dope. Very, very stoked to have them in the show, and got some really nice comments on them so far, with people just coming through. Michael Price in the center, who is a Niftorian min-pass artist, and that's Peter Bourget on the right with the sort of computer-assisted robotic painting.
Got it. And we do have a close up here, Skojo, of your piece.
Nice.
Violin Femmes, yes. Thanks.
Yes.
Including that.
Okay, so
Skoj, can you tell us? Yeah, I was just going to say.
Not about me. Not about me.
Yeah, we want to hear a little bit.
Come on.
We put it up there.
Sure. I mean, Colin said a little bit of how I do these. I mean, I've got a neuropathy in my feet, so I kind of always start every piece usually at night on big pieces of transparency, and I just throw paint down on the ground because my feet are always kind of burning. And then I'm kind of doing it in this kind of meditative stance. I don't even really care what the images really look like. I'm just kind of making marks. And then I take those transparencies, I cut them up, I collage them, I take a picture of them in low lighting, bring them into Photoshop, and then I compose the images on that. Use Painter, Corel Painter, use Procreate. Then I print them out as an archival print as a giclée, glue them to cradled wood boards, and then I kind of rinse and repeat. Then I do more paint pen, more paint, a whole bunch of collage as well, and then resin on the top.
So Skoj, really quick, this is what I got when I was getting in a crit in grad school. Was I said, basically, I described my process just like you did, and one of the other students, a painting student, she said, "That's not good enough. What's it about?" So I'm going to put the same question to you. What's it about?
Yes, I've thought about many ways to answer this. A lot of times I want the person viewing it to have their own opinion, but I can tell you loosely what this is about. I mean, I think through a lot of my health issues, I've had a lot of people kind of support me. So I started this series kind of thinking about my mom, about my wife, about my kids, about all the people in my life that have really helped me a lot during this health kind of chaotic moment of my life. And so it's about kind of the symphony of support systems that we have that kind of help us get through any moment in time. And so it's supposed to be a little bit of a kind of chaotic vibe to it, but it's supposed to still be kind of peaceful and to create a kind of a symphony of a positive environment of support. So that's kind of loosely what it's about. A lot of my stuff is about kind of this levity within chaos. So as you know, the laser cats behind me, that started it all. Laser cats make me laugh, and so there's a little bit of kind of humor in everything that I do. So
beautiful. Nice.
So I noticed all the sharding on this. That's one of the things that comes up, all these sharp edges. I get the sense that that's your feet coming through and being displayed in your artwork.
I guess so.
All right. So back to you, Colin. So do you want to describe this first, or do you want me to play the video for this first?
Well, briefly, this piece it's called Urbanite. It was drawn on a Wacom tablet in Adobe Illustrator in 1999 when I was living downtown in the East Village in New York. And it's from a body of work called Metagraphs, which I recently launched as an NFT collection. I put a microsite up too at metagraphnft.com. That's sort of like is where I'm sort of like, cataloging the drops, and there's some information about the series, but it's an abstract digital drawing. And then, what I've been doing is I selected 23 of these drawings that were done between 99 and 2004 and releasing them as NFTs. So I'm going to be, dropping one a month on the 23rd day of each month. This is the first one that I dropped. It was my sort of first one of this series. And, it was something that was essentially commissioned. I met a collector online who said, well, he picked out a couple ones that he liked, and this was one of them. And, I minted it and he bought it. And I was like, okay, I'm hooked now on NFTs. That was easy. I didn't have to ship anything, didn't have to store anything. It was fun to make it and, compose the audio track for it. And the audio track is kind of like about the city. So that's
okay,
my
let's
lead
listen
in.
to it.
Local train. The next stop is 23rd Street.
Okay, so that's great. The soundtracks are really interesting, and I think we're going to see that time and again. But sort of goes back to this idea that you expressed, is saying, "Geez, the full motion pieces really are designed for a digital environment. They have more impact. NFTs are a really great way to show this." And I was also thinking this idea of the age we live in, when we haven't had people over to our house for 2 years, and one of the great things about having art is to share it with people, right? And so what we might have had is we might have had guests over the house. We'd show them a piece that we acquired. Since that's not happening, and since like a lot of people moved during COVID, including a couple of the people on this on this stream right now, and like this is a way to still connect, and it's a way that actually is more seamless. It strikes me that it's like of our age, and maybe it took the art world 20 plus years to catch up with the age, to figure out how to participate fully in the digital world.
I agree, and people ask me all the time. I was actually on a little short NPR interview this morning, and the interviewer said, can you explain what, an NFT is? Because I still don't get it. And I said, I see it as, a public online certificate of ownership. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything other than that. It could refer to a video, a still image, any other thing. But I went on to sort of say that I think that NFTs are one of the very few actual valid use cases for blockchain. That is, I think people are trying to make blockchain applicable to just about anything that humans have ever invented. And that really is just going to, it'll be like the .com crash where everyone and their brother needed a website and would pay anything to get one. And then eventually they all ran out of money and said, you know what, now we don't have any money and we have this website. So they went out of business, other than the e-commerce companies who stuck around. You know, and I think it'll kind of be like that too. But I think, you know, so much money has gone into the NFT art sort of, you know, NFT art basically invested in it, that it's unlikely that that's just going to go away, I think. But many other applications probably will.
Okay, Mesmertron.
So yeah, this one drawn in 2003. You know, it was dropped shortly after that. It was included in that show NFT Now that Ann Spalter curated. She picked this one, and it was the first piece of mine to be resold on the secondary market.
Discovery Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
I love the throwback nature to this.
I gotta ask, how do you name these? Because this has such a badass name. And you can't say just because it sounds good. I want to know why you named it that.
You know, I mean, it's just something that popped into my head, honestly. I don't know where it came from. And almost all my work, you know, the naming of it is the last step, you know, that comes afterwards. So yeah, I don't know where that came. I like to make up words, you know, and it just sort of like popped up.
Love it.
Thank you.
To me, it describes the age that we live in, the information age. I mean, like all the different soundtracks that you put in there, sort of taking us. So, and it's really interesting too. The music, sort of the heavy synth thing. That's like a more modern beat than you would have seen. Like it doesn't fit with the dial up, because the dial up was from a different era, 90s, and then you pull back into the NASA stuff, which I think that's what that is. And so that's probably 60s, 70s, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think about like TVs, internet, you know, synthetic music. I love it. I think it's a really cool piece. And, you know, I think it's one of the ones that I like more every time I see it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do want to say that, you know, all of the samples that I use are licensed. That is, you know, I subscribe to sound libraries or they're open source samples. I do not steal artist work or appropriate things. I don't do that. I mean, other people do that in their practice regularly, but I'm, you know, as an artist myself, I try to respect other people's intellectual property.
Fair enough. Okay. Nailing Icon.
So yeah, this one basically was drawn around, I would say 2004. And when I first showed it to a couple people before it had a name, two people independently said, you know, that reminds me of the Virgin Mary. And that seemed to me like such a specific reference to come from an abstract piece that I gave it that name, Kneeling Icon, sort of to refer to the, you know, religious iconography in you know, religious painting, I guess, or I guess they're called pietas, you know, and yeah, you know, and this piece kind of was a part of a series of these black and white, very kind of industrial looking ones that were the first ones that I minted out into the Metagraph collection on Foundation. So there were sort of three of them that I dropped to release the set as part of my NFT Accelerator NFT 10-year project there. So
that's right. Well, we can talk about that at the end. All right, let me play this. Okay, so this piece confuses me because it seems like it should have been very recent. And there's something about the composition that makes me think of something that would have been created in the last 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure exactly why. So what were you doing with these black and white pieces back then?
Essentially I was producing them as prints. I don't know if you could see the piece behind me here, but that was a mock-up basically that I did for the exhibition. That's about 3 by 4 feet. So I did a whole series of these as digital monoprints on canvas that are about 3 or 4 feet. And it was drawn in 2004. And I also had done them as limited edition prints on paper. But I always thought that the actual code was the work, and the physical objects were sort of a manifestation of that art. And that kind of came about when early on, it was actually a computer scientist. He explained vector graphics to me. He was doing his doctorate at NYU, and he gave me access to their lab to start like kind of playing around with different software and stuff. And he said, everything in vector-based art is defined mathematically, so you could scale it up as large as you want. You could even view the code. I said, huh. So I opened up my EPS file in Notepad or something, and I saw, wow, there's code here. That's cool. So that's where the name metagraph comes from. Is that the object or even the image, is a representation of this code. So the code itself is a metagraph, like the meta representation of the graphic. And that's kind of like where the term or that name derived from, I guess. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where it came from. And, that's sort of the origin of, where that piece came from. But yeah, the revival of it and turning it into an animation came later. And when I first was thinking about this show in Southampton, which was like right in the beginning of this project, I thought that would be the place I'd like to have the exhibition. And I wrote a pitch to the artistic director there. She helped sort of push it through, and then quit, which I was a little disappointed about, because then I was working with a new person in the execution of the project, which was fine. He was amazing. A guy by the name of Joe Diamond, who's the general manager at Southampton Arts Center. We work closely together, and in my mind's eye, I saw that piece on that specific wall that it's placed on,
Right.
printed large. So I made it a point to do that. So it's printed. Let's see. I think that's.
Cool.
So that was basically the sort of last little bit added to that, which came to me sort of after the idea of printing it as a large scale piece, and after the NFT, I realized like I had been playing around a little bit with augmented reality through learning about it through some of the Techspressionism artists, and I thought, well, why don't I have the physical piece be the trigger image for this AR experience. So I use an app called Artivive, where basically if you view the physical piece through your smartphone in the Artivive app, it turns into the NFT, and the NFT and the piece on the wall are sort of sold together. So the collector would get both the physical piece and the NFT.
Okay, so I just have to ask you. So I think you said that this was originally a still. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was drawn in 2004 in Illustrator.
Got it. But then more recently, you animated it.
Yeah, I animated it this year in 2022, right before demo day, actually.
That's why it seems modern. There's something about it that like seems like of our era, like of our recent era. And I think that's interesting. I wonder if you would have animated it differently, 15 or 20 years ago.
Probably, I mean, one other thing about vector art, and these works specifically, is they were created on layers to begin with, within Illustrator. So that really lent itself to the idea of animating them. And also the files are very light. That is, when I was first drawing these, you could literally save them on a floppy disk. They're tiny, a couple 100K.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right.
So that helps with them animating too, because they're, they're fairly easy to animate.
Well, I love that too. This idea that, you know, it was a finished piece almost 20 years ago, and yet now it's a new piece.
Hmm.
You know, the original piece still is a thing, right?
Right.
The still, but now you have this full motion, and yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing that like you can go back to your catalog, your work, and you can do other things with it.
Hmm. Well, you know, I had done a bunch of these as animations, maybe like 2011. I did a collaboration with this guy, Intersolar, who is a German drum and bass musician. And I don't know how we connected. It might have been on Facebook or something like that. And he was like, "These are sweet, you know, like maybe we could do a collab together or whatever." And I was like, "What do you think about like if I string a bunch of these together as an animation? Like you could put together a drum and bass track for it." So we did that, but that was pre NFT, you know. So
Yeah.
it kind of like took me through the experience of animating them, which is, you know, in a sort of a timeline based animation. I did those ones in Flash, which is now Adobe Animate, but Flash was Director years ago when there was, you know, no web, when people were using CD-ROMs, and that's what I was doing back in the mid 90s, you know, initially. So it's really the same program. Director was made by Macromedia, which Adobe bought, turned it into Flash, and then eventually Steve Jobs killed Flash because iPhones wouldn't play Flash and iOS devices wouldn't play Flash. So Adobe basically rebranded Flash as Adobe Animate, which you could author out as HTML5 or, you know, video files and stuff like that. So it's essentially the same program that with a timeline-based animation.
Okay, and so now I think we have something special here.
Yes. So this piece is going to drop on Saturday. It's the first time it's ever been seen online. I have not posted it other than a still image sort of teaser on Instagram. And it's the next Metagraph animation. This one was drawn originally in 1999, and it's called For Piet, Piet. So it's a reference to Piet Mondrian, who you know, was a modernist painter. You might recognize the color palette. He did these sort of squares. The thing that really always interested me about Mondrian is when I bought a book of his work, I looked back at the early work, and it's not abstract. It's actually extremely well crafted figurative work that looks like your traditional Dutch masters paintings, like Rembrandt, basically. And so, you know, that gave me a real respect and appreciation for his abstract work that I didn't have before. And also he was an extremely gifted writer. So he wrote a couple books, one of which was called Natural Reality and Abstract Reality, all about this conversation between an abstract painter, a traditional figurative painter, and someone who's not even an artist. And the whole book is this sort of conversation. He wrote the whole thing, but it really explored a lot of ideas. So, you know, it's my tribute to him. He was a huge jazz enthusiast. In fact, I think MoMA did a show of his work where they published, you know, his playlist of jazz records that he used to listen to also. So, you know, that provided inspiration for this piece.
All right, well, let's listen. Is Saturday the 23rd?
It is.
Was that on purpose?
Coincidentally enough. I mean, it's not a coincidence that I'm dropping the NFT on the 23rd, but it is a really strange coincidence that that's when the opening is happening. I did not plan that. You know, it just kind of
That's
worked
awesome.
out that way. So
Rewarded. Well, that's good. So, Skojo, you've been quiet. What are your thoughts? We just went through a lot of artwork.
I mean, amazing stuff. I mean, Colin's very, very talented. You can tell he's got a range of styles, and I'm just so grateful that he brought me into this group. I'm super excited to to meet the other Techspressionists and to meet you for the first time.
Yeah, we've
And,
never met in real life, which is really weird, you know.
It is bizarre. We've talked quite a bit.
It is. It is. This whole Zoom thing is a strange phenomenon.
Yep.
Yeah, but it seems so natural now.
It is. And actually, you know what? Like, I mean, for me, it's not that strange because I was always like a nerd. And I actually used this program called iVisit, which was a very early desktop video conferencing program when people had the Connectix quick cams, the little eyeball round cameras. And the guy that wrote that, Tim Dorsey, he wrote See You See Me, which was the first desktop video conferencing app. And it was called See You because he wrote it when he was a student at Cornell University. So when I started using it, I actually met a bunch of people on there that, you know, whatever. And I wrote to him about the experience, and he wrote me back. And it was really interesting, you know, to correspond with the guy. But, you know, everyone was on dial-up, but there was this program iVisit, and people would just go in there like a chat room, and the only unifying thing was it was people nerdy enough to know about iVisit. And you know, there were really interesting people on there, and some of them were artists. So yeah, it's come of age.
That's great stuff. Okay, so here's our little call to action. If you're going to be in the Southampton area, you should definitely check this out.
And real quick, so if you can't make it to the opening on Wednesday, April 27th at 5:30 Eastern time, we are having our international reception on Zoom. So if you go to techspressionism.com/salon, you can register for that. And we're going to have one artist walking through the space. And then a lot of the artists from other countries are going to be there talking about their work. And it's going to be cool.
Oh, that's a great idea. I'm glad you're doing that. That's really amazing. Okay, folks, we were going to talk a little bit about the accelerator because that was a pretty good experience that we all had together. But I think I'm going to save that for another time. Maybe we'll just do like a shorter thing where we just talk about the accelerator.
It was amazing. I'll sum it up as that. NFT Accelerator was amazing. I'm evangelizing it to all my artist friends. You guys really helped me formulate my project, and it was extremely rewarding and well worth the time. So I am very grateful that you guys, you know, you picked me as one of the participants, and yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah, I'm really glad you did it. I mean, I think it was amazing. We had a lot of great applicants for our first group. We've got another group coming up right now. So if anybody's watching this in the next couple of weeks, there's a new one that kicks off in May. It is an application process, but there's no cost to apply or to participate. It's just something that we do because we're interested in the space. And ultimately, you know, as people who are in the space, either creating or collecting, we just wanted to create a scenario where the creatives coming into the space, you know, had the advantage of some knowledge that is hard to accumulate. And maybe just because of that, do some things that are a little more interesting, maybe have a little more success earlier.
Yeah, you know, one thing that I really wanted to say about that is that a lot of my artist friends ask me, so what's the catch? Or do I need to mint my work on Niftorian? You know, what percentage do they get? And I said, you know, actually, you can mint it wherever you want. They get 0%. And, you know, there is no catch as far as I could see it. You know, it was an amazing experience. So, again, you know, muchas gracias to you guys, and highly recommended.
Well, thank you so much for participating, doing such great stuff. And you were a great mentor to some of the other artists during the process. And so that was really great. Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up. We ran long today, but heck, it was a great conversation. It was like really cool art, good story, and a little promotion. So maybe some people come on Saturday and see the opening. That would be really cool. But definitely check out next Wednesday, the 27th. Hopefully you're watching this before then. And I'm going to check that out. That sounds like really fun. You know, a way that if you can't get to the end of Long Island, which is a long ways away, even from Manhattan, then that's a great option for folks. All right, folks. I'm Creative Artist Rex. That's Scojo. You heard a lot about Colin Goldberg. You now know who he is. You now know what Techspressionism is, although you're just getting a taste of Techspressionism because it is an approach that is still becoming. So till next week, everybody, happy hunting.